So today's talk, again, is on the 3 marks of existence. I'm going to read a quote out of the section in the book that you read, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Culavedalla Sutta. And Tuesday's class was also on, obviously, the same subject, and I read most of the Dhamma, the Culavedalla Sutta. I'm going to start somewhere in the middle of that sutta, so if you want to pick up the beginning, and I encourage you to, it's an important sutta. But from the chapter that you read, just the Buddha's words describing what awakening is. Free of craving and clinging, one is not agitated. That's it. Unagitated, this one is totally unbound and free of dukkha. An arahant. There's a lot of, I've been saying this a lot lately, there's how much there is in just one statement of the Buddha, and there's so much in just that one. The Buddha often talks about the problem of anatta, of self-referential views, is that we cling or attach ourselves to suffering. We become one with our suffering. And so then suffering simply becomes a reflection of our life. We wonder how come we can't get out of it or even notice that we're doing it. It's because of that. It's because of clinging to it. And the absence of clinging is an awakened human being, an arahant. Is there any questions about just that, about the simplicity and the directness of that statement? Does everybody understand that? Maybe I should even put it this way. Does everybody desire a calm and peaceful mind as an example of an awakened state? That's good, because that's what we're chasing. I shouldn't put it that way, though, chasing. We talked about this Tuesday, I think, wasn't it? About somebody brought up the idea of, actually 2 people, of isn't desire for awakening the same as clinging? Isn't that clinging to awakening? And actually Frank's wife said, isn't that clinging to wanting to meditate twice a day and develop the Dhamma? Isn't that a form of clinging? And of course it is. But what we're talking about when we understand the overall context of the Dhamma, that it is ignorance of Four Noble Truths. That is the primary problem. So it's developing understanding where there was once ignorance. So it's a very specific type of clinging or attachment. It's clinging or attachment to ignorance that continues suffering. So anything that would further that is unskillful. Any underlying desire to continue to cling to ignorance. Clinging to the Dhamma or something that will teach you how to develop a calm and peaceful mind is obviously not unskillful. It's still the same thing, but it's not hurtful. We live in a world, this really relates to the impermanence and not self-characteristic. We live in an impermanent world. What that implies is that anything is possible. So on a very simple and maybe too mundane a level, anything is possible using any word that we use. So using the word clinging to describe something unskillful doesn't necessarily mean that we can't use the word clinging or desire to describe something that is skillful. Is that clear? So the only reason I'm making this point is that a mind that is rooted in ignorance will grasp at anything to continue to insist on its own ignorance, including saying, well, what you're learning is inconsistent. It says that you shouldn't cling to anything, and yet here you're being taught to cling to awakening. That's an ego self that does that. And if you look at it, just that statement alone, obviously it's a foolish statement. It's just using words to communicate. But there's an important lesson in there, because a mind rooted in ignorance will distort reality in any way, subtle or very obvious, in order to continue its own ignorance. And it does it with something as simple as the Dhamma. It tries to turn the Dhamma back on its head. Is that clear how that happens, and that we all tend to do that even with the Dhamma? And that's why it's so important to maintain the Eightfold Path as the path and not add anything to it or take anything away from it, because it's the only way that we can know that we're practicing what an awakened human being taught. And I remember when I first realized that, I spent many, many years just kind of wandering around in Buddhism, getting more and more confused and more frustrated. And it wasn't until I realized that everything the Buddha taught was in the context of Four Noble Truths. And the only path that he taught, the simple and direct path, was the Eightfold Path. And that changed everything. It made sense to me. It actually had an impact on me and actually made positive changes where 20 or 25 years of hard practice really brought nothing but confusion and frustration. Lorna, you had a question?
Getting back to describing meditating as clinging, but when I meditate, I know the main purpose of meditation is to improve concentration. But I always look at the meditation, and sitting in meditation, that's the time when I relieve myself from anatta.
Yes.
This period of time, I am not who I think I am.
Yep.
And that is the relief of not clinging in meditation. So
yes.
When his wife said, "Is that clinging to meditation?" That's the time you're not clinging to anatta.
Yeah.
So that's how I think of meditation.
Thank you for saying that. I was thinking coming down here this morning, bouncing off of roots and trees, that, and it was just what you said, that sitting in meditation, being mindful of the breath, is the sole selfless act that an ignorant mind can achieve. Did I say that correctly? And again, kind of emphasizing this underlying point that it is with impermanence, within dukkha, within samsara, that we awaken. There's not an escape plan here. The Eightfold Path isn't an escape from it. It's a way of recognizing our contributions to it while we're within it and ending it. And so the act of meditating properly within the framework of that the Buddha taught is a selfless act, isn't it? And it's a direct selfless act. It's saying for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes, I'm not going to feed my ego. And when my ego comes up and says, take a look at me, I'm going to come back to the breath. That's meditation. And that coming back to me, to where I am, is a selfless act. And of course, I'm not talking about an established permanent self. Coming back to what I am in this moment, the process of becoming, and being able to recognize that that's what's going on here. This is what life is. Life is either, well, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Life is either a chase after futility, or what is futile, or it's an opportunity to grasp awakening. And that's the choice that we have in every moment. And when we can look at this moment, it doesn't mean we should be hyper vigilant and notice, is this moment going to give me awakening? But to understand that we don't have to do that. We can integrate the Eightfold Path. And as we remain mindful of the Eightfold Path, we know that we're inclining our mind towards awakening. We're using this instant to its fullest potential. Is that clear? I've been saying that a lot this morning. Because it's really getting down to it. What's occurring in this? What's occurring in my mind? What am I holding in mind in this moment? And if it's what is occurring in front of me in a meaningful way, I'm good to go. I'm non-distracted. I'm engaged in my own life. But if in the moment I'm thinking about what I need to be different in this moment, either added to me or taken away from me, or the situation to be different than it is, I'm out of my mind, aren't I? I've lost my, in a true sense, I've lost my mind. Why? Because I'm not here with what's occurring. It doesn't mean they're going to wrap me up. They might. But it simply means, and how can I respond appropriately if I'm not present with what's occurring? It's the whole problem. And it relates again to these first two marks of impermanence and the not self characteristic. Because of a misunderstanding of what constitutes a self in this overarching environment, we miss the whole thing. And I'm going to get to that in a little while if I ever get to it. The importance of understanding the ambivalence that we have to most of our life. In other words, if it hasn't grabbed our attention because it hasn't grabbed our ego's attention, we're simply ambivalent to it. But ambivalence obscures the underlying ignorance and still produces stress. And I'll get to that in a minute. I don't leave too many people hanging on that. If you don't understand what I just said, just ask me again in a little while. The Buddha's words, just getting back to emphasizing the Eightfold Path. Those well instructed in regard to the Dhamma, with regard for the noble ones, I'm sorry, this is Dhammadinna's words to Visakha. Those well instructed in regard to the Dhamma, with regard to the noble ones and those with integrity, well disciplined in their practice, do not believe the form to be the self. Do not believe this physical form is the self. And by extension, we don't attach ourselves to external objects either. They do not believe that feelings establish or define a self, or that perceptions define a self. So this is relating awakening directly to the five clinging aggregates: form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and ongoing consciousness. Those awakened don't identify to feelings or perceptions or the physical form. That's all that Dhammadinna is saying, and it's checked by the Buddha. These are free of mental fabrications, having found no foundation for those fabrications. Remember, fabrications are assumptions based on input from the external world. If there's no fabrications if there's no basis, no foundation for the fabrications, no fabrications will form. Dependent origination states, from ignorance through 12 observable causative links, all manner of suffering arises. The second link is fabrications. Right? That'll be important as I go further. They do not assume that thoughts establish a self or that the self possesses thoughts. What about that famous saying, I think, therefore I am? And that's one of the most famous sayings to establish a self-referential existence, isn't it? Just the fact that I'm having a thought proves that I'm here and proves it by extension, or probably not the right word, by inference. It's stating that because I've had this thought, that it's a reasonable thought. And if that thought is rooted in ignorance, it's an unreasonable thought, isn't it? If it's leading towards further confusion. That doesn't say that every ignorant thought is going to cause suffering. Again, I'm getting into that word thing because it's been coming up a lot. If our lives and our views are rated or are based on ignorance of Four Noble Truths, the only general experience can be further ignorance, right? That's clear. So what the Buddha is pointing out, or Dhammadinna is pointing out, here's the solution. They do not assume that consciousness or ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance is the self, or that the self possesses consciousness, or that the self possesses an ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance. Another way of saying that we cling to our suffering. We cling to these ideas, even though we've seen in the past from our own experience that it creates suffering in our lives. At the very least, it creates confusion and frustration in our lives. Right? Any questions where I'm going with this so far? Because it's getting into a slightly subtle. Lauren has heard some of this on Tuesday night. But,
Can you slow down? He's talking very fast.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
He's excited.
I am. I'm excited. I'm trying.
You are going there.
Ellen?
Yeah. 100 miles an hour today.
You know, it might be. The power was out since noon yesterday. I didn't have anything to eat except a banana, and I had a half a cold cup of coffee this morning. I keep coffee in the refrigerator, and I guess that's
that could be.
So I'll try to slow down. Okay. Thank you for saying that. You're the only one.
Good job of it, caught it.
Impermanence doesn't mean slow all the time. They do not believe that feelings establish or define a self, or that perceptions define a self. They are free of mental fabrications, having no foundations for those fabrications. They do not assume that thoughts establish a self, or that the self possesses thoughts. Again, think about how I'm rereading what I sped through before. But we do that on such a subconscious level that we don't even realize it, that every thought that we have, that Anatta has, insists that it be a self-referential thought. In other words, that it has a component of itself in everything that it attaches itself to, including, I've used this before, that I might notice that I might know that I don't like Paisley. I think that's that pattern. I don't like pattern zafus. As soon as I see it, I get upset. It shouldn't even be in this room. That's conditioned thinking. A black zafu is the same as that, isn't it? It's the same exact thing with a different cover, except my perception and my preference says I don't like that for some reason. It doesn't matter where it came from. That's causing an agitation in my mind because of ignorance. It simply doesn't matter. But I'm personalizing that by attaching myself to it. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. That last part of it? Yes.
I think the word possesses, or the thought does not possess, and the ego does not possess the thought.
Yeah, the self possesses thought.
Self, yeah. That word possession, like, really drives it home, because I feel like ego is like, what can be what's mine? This is mine. That's mine. This is mine.
It's all mine.
It's all mine. Like, this is my house and my dog and my husband and so.
Yeah, and even when it's not, it's yours, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. My students and my projects and my,
or then
everything is about me.
Yep. And then even the things that aren't ours, we'll evaluate them as if they are ours. Right. In other words, it doesn't matter that that's a gold or a pattern zafu, but because I'm so attached to everything being me, I got to notice it. It has to distract me, and I might even comment on it. What kind of awakened master would have a cushion like that in his meditation? That's the constant distraction of an ego self.
We did that with everything.
We do it with,
Wow.
that is
Yeah.
mostly
Wow.
what happens when I walk into a room and see that. I'm ambivalent to it. But underneath, in my mind, I'm saying, that foolish guy, what does he have that I'm making?
Yeah, yeah.
That's the stress that arises from ambivalence, but still noticing that something should be different. Is that clear?
That's subtle.
That is the real core problem. It's most of the things that we are neutral to that we are lost in. And it's because even those things that we're neutral to, we have to create a self-referential experience about, we don't recognize it. So we've created this powerful strategy to ignore every aspect of our life. The reason, again, why I'm emphasizing this now is it relates directly to where we're going, but also we can get caught up in understanding dukkha, of being focused only on that one aspect of dukkha that's painful, and lose sight of it's all dukkha because we're distracted by it.
I'm going to have to work on this, John.
Boy, me too.
Yeah, this is
Like
deep.
12
To
years
me,
or so.
okay?
I served for about 12 years or so.
Well, wait,
Yeah.
I don't mean to cut you off, because this has come up a lot in the last couple of weeks. Where this is going and how hard it is to put it in perspective. Remember, this is a slightly different or new idea that I'm introducing, but it all is in part of is all in context of the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. And over time, as you integrate this, it'll become obvious, or more obvious. It'll become as obvious as the suffering or disappointing aspects of dukkha.
That's just what I was going to say. How do you notice this when you in life to avoid doing it when you don't notice you're doing it?
You can't.
Okay.
You have to notice it. And again, that's what the Buddha awakened to. Remember, he awakened to the problem of ignorance, and he realized that the only way to overcome that was to develop an Eightfold Path so you can recognize when you're in it. So that's the answer to your question. How do you know you're in it? You have to develop an Eightfold Path. And if you do, again, if you want to practice what the Buddha taught, that's what you do. If you want to do something else, that's what you do. That's fine. The critical point is that if you want to awaken, you have to practice the Eightfold Path. You may believe that going bowling on Thursday is the most important thing for your awakening. And if you do it every Thursday night, you may even squeeze a few 300 games in there, but you're not likely to awaken. The point I'm making is because you believe it. It goes back to that what we think about. Just because you believe it, or maybe you might find a large group of people, say 20 million people, that believe that bowling on Thursday night is a path to awakening, and 20 million people could be a good business to buy into if it happens. And so 20 million people of your friends, your associates, go bowling on Thursday thinking that some Friday morning they're going to wake up awakened. It's not going to happen. But because you believe it, you're going to do it, aren't you?
Yeah.
When you're going to do it with quite a bit of intention and effort behind it because of the level of your belief, because of your associations. The Eightfold Path is the same way. It doesn't matter, though, that 20 million people or one person is developing the Eightfold Path, because it will deliver awakening. That's why the Buddha developed it, so that we could recognize when we're stuck in dukkha within an ignorant mind and give us a direct path out of it. So what an important question. So let me get a little further before we get too far. I want to finish this section because we have more to get to next week. We could just add another week, but I'm not. Have I slowed down a little bit? I got a feeling I haven't.
No,
Not really,
you haven't, John.
but that's okay.
Where am I here? Wait a minute. Okay.
Doesn't the Buddha say
Okay.
something about not hurrying?
Yep.
Oh, boy.
So-
Oh, boy.
Thank you, Diane. So earlier in the has anybody or everyone heard the talk from Tuesday or read the Dhammadinna Sutta, Culavedalla Sutta? So in this sutta, Dhammadinna teaches her ex-husband, who's a member of the Sangha, Visakha, in a very concise way, the entire Dhamma, focused on eye-making. And it's a very, I encourage you to listen to Tuesday's talk and read it. I'm not going to go into it again today. I think I just said it. In a very concise way, she teaches Visakha the importance of the Eightfold Path and the importance in understanding the nature of eye-making, where it comes from. And so this is about halfway through it. And Visakha then asks Dhammadinna if the qualities of virtue, the Eightfold Path is characterized as a path of wisdom, virtue, and concentration. Wisdom is right view and right intention. Virtue is right speech, action, and livelihood. Concentration is right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. So if the Eightfold Path, the qualities of virtue, concentration, and wisdom are developed through the Eightfold Path, or do these qualities simply inspire the Eightfold Path? Dhammadinna's answer. Visakha, the Eightfold Path, is inspired by the qualities of virtue, concentration, and wisdom. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood inspire the development of heightened virtue. Right effort, right mindfulness, right meditation inspire the development of heightened concentration. And right view and right intention inspire and develop heightened wisdom. So in this, here Dhammadinna is teaching, inspire means to inspire, to provide the intention and the motivation and the direction behind anything we do. If I want to get up and walk out of this room, just the thought of getting up and walking out of the room won't get me out of the room, will it? I have to generate the intention. I have to generate I have to have the inspiration to actually get up and walk out. Anything we accomplish is exactly the same way. Sorry about that. I lost my place. Visakha then asks, what is concentration and what is the framework for right concentration? What are the requisites and how is it developed? Concentration also means, or samadhi also means concentration. Samadhi, non-distraction, is concentration. The framework for right concentration is the four foundations of mindfulness. Being mindful of the breath in the body, being mindful of feelings arising and passing away, being mindful of thoughts arising and passing away, and being mindful of the present quality of mind. Right effort provides the requisites for right concentration. You should always endeavor with skillful desire and persistence for the non-arising of unskillful qualities and to abandon unskillful qualities that have yet arisen. Does anybody know what I just read? A lot of words. It simply means to be mindful of the Eightfold Path. That's how we're mindful of unskillful qualities that have arisen, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, and be mindful when we have developed those qualities, simply to be aware of what's occurring in our life. Visakha, always endeavor with great desire and persistence to generate skillful qualities that have yet arisen and to maintain skillful qualities that have arisen. Visakha asks, what are fabrications, dear lady? There are three fabrications. There are bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. In and out breaths are bodily fabrications, as breaths are generated from the clinging form of aggregate. So just simply using the act of breathing is neither skillful or unskillful. It's how we use it. But because it's part of the form, it's part of the feeling aggregate. Is that clear?
No.
What's important is to recognize that even though the five clinging aggregates describe the ongoing personal experience of suffering, the five clinging aggregates themselves are neither good nor bad, moral or immoral, skillful or unskillful. They simply are. And so in this present moment, if I'm attached to form, that form is going to prove to be the reflection of the state of my consciousness. And clinging to that form is only going to continue that consciousness. Let me go back one. As a fact, let me read that paragraph again. What are fabrications, dear lady? There are three fabrications: bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. In and out breaths are bodily fabrications, as breaths are generated from clinging. We're in the physical body. Breaths. We're in this physical body. Until we're out of the physical body, we need to continually direct our attention towards something. In this instance, Dhammadinna is saying, using the word clinging as mindfulness. We need to be clinging our minds to our breath during meditation to deepen concentration. Again, remember the context. He's talking about concentration. Just ordinary breathing, we don't need to be attached to our breath. Right? And again, and in a little bit deeper context, in the context of creating fabrications. Feelings and perceptions are mental fabrications as they are generated by the clinging aggregates of feelings and perceptions. Conditioned and discursive thought and evaluation are verbal fabrications as they are generated from the clinging aggregate of consciousness. Relatively clear, at least? Because we have let me go a little bit further. I think this will become a little more clear. If not, ask the question again, please. How then does the attainment of the cessation of feelings and perceptions develop? A well-informed person who has developed understanding through the Eightfold Path does not have a thought of attainment. Rather, their refined minds lead to the cessation of feelings and perceptions. Verbal fabrications cease, then bodily fabrications, and finally mental fabrications. Dhammadinna is just describing the process of awakening. This feedback loop that we're stuck in simply ends. There's nothing else that we need to do except take to the Dhamma.
The conscious effort, though, to do that.
Yep.
My linear mind's having a hard time with the mental, bodily, and what was the other one? Mental fabrication.
Verbal fabrications.
Verbal.
Yep.
That's not necessarily chronological. That's just, she's saying.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. None of this is really chronological.
Right.
Even the Eightfold Path itself is.
Got it. Okay.
Good question. Okay. When a well-informed person emerges from the cessation of feelings and perceptions, they are empty of clinging, empty of ignorance, free of self-identification and conditioned mind. Right there, Dhammadinna is explaining clearly the whole purpose and goal of the Dhamma, to empty oneself of clinging to ignorant views, or empty oneself of ignorance. The well-informed person's mind inclines to seclusion and away from delight and entanglement with the world. The Buddha describes in a way, what you just described a little earlier, Lorna, is clinging to meditation. It's a refuge from the world.
And Anatta.
Yep. Okay. Visakha then asks, how many kinds of feelings are there?
Wow.
How many would you think?
Hundreds of
I
thousands.
feel like she's gonna say just one, but
Yeah.
but yeah, my answer is like hundreds, thousands.
5.
There are only 3 types of feelings.
Oh.
Now, again, remember, in the context of the Dhamma, we can get lost in the millions and millions, infinite number, as Carl Sagan just say, billions and billions of feelings we have, and get lost in them and try and identify each and every one and where they come from and analyze it and do all this nonsense. All feelings can be classified in 3 ways, 3 feelings. There are only 3 types of feelings, Visakha. There is pleasant feeling. There is a painful feeling. We all know pleasant and painful, right? And there is neutral feelings. Now we're getting down to it. It's those neutral feelings that we spend most of our life in, and that most of our life gets lost in.
So what's an example of a neutral feeling?
Yeah, I'm struggling with that one too.
So
I gave a few examples. One I got myself in trouble with, so I won't use it again. But I'm vacuuming the floor. And when I vacuum the floor, I have to have the music blasting. The music blasting is the constant distraction. It allows me to then vacuum the floor, feeling that life is okay, and I don't need anything to be any different than it is except to vacuum the floor. But in order to do that, I need the distraction of music playing. That creates an environment of neutrality. I'm okay with what's going on. A mind that doesn't need distraction can just vacuum the floor and stay present with what's occurring. So does that answer the question? And so most of our lives is spent in that ambivalent state, isn't it? And we usually do that word multitasking has taken on a lot of power recently, hasn't it? The truth is we can't really do 2 things at once. We can be doing things, but we're not consciously aware of it. Subconsciously, we can. I'm not trying to make an absolute point here. Realistically, we can only be thinking and focused on one thing at a time. But when we try to distract our mind away from what we should be thinking about, vacuuming the floor, washing the dishes, by doing something else, then we're creating that environment, We're creating an environment of ambivalence or neutrality that we simply don't notice that we're suffering in that moment because we've changed what we're focused on. Is that clear?
Yeah.
We've created something for our minds to be engaged with while we're doing something else.
Yeah. I do that all the time.
Okay, well, we all do it.
Since Tuesday, I've noticed how much I do this. I mean, that is
Well,
television, that is, so much stuff.
yeah, and that's really the
And-
point that I'm bringing
and
this
you-
up.
And you do hit this neutrality thing, yeah?
But
Yeah.
you're talking about conscious versus, I'm thinking in terms of neurotransmitters, and none of this makes any sense.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
the music
yeah.
is causing something to happen in your brain, you're releasing neurotransmitters and you're just yada, yada, yada.
That's a good way of putting it, Mary, because those neurotransmitters are making me feel good about doing something I would otherwise not.
Yeah.
And so in that instant, they're creating an experience for me that's ignoring what's actually occurring.
So
Me
that's
turning
not
on the
skillful,
music,
In
right?
terms of consciousness, you're.
in terms of awakening or understanding where I am. So by me turning on the radio as I'm flipping the switch on a vacuum cleaner is a completely distracted act in both ways. I'm even distracted away from what I should be doing and maybe do a better job at it. Again, I'm using a rather mundane example, but this is how we tend to live our lives. And the significance of it as far as neurotransmitters is that the radio or the music creates a way of thinking that fools me into thinking I'm okay in this moment. It makes me feel good.
Like the positive of the radio.
It distracts you.
Yeah.
Negative.
Yes, and that's the importance of it. Again, we don't have to. We can look at this as moral or immoral too, and this really has nothing to do with it. It has to do with a very well-focused and specific Dhamma practice. And much of what is ignored is that neutral part that the Buddha is referring to. And this isn't the only sutta that he talks about this. There's many suttas where he talks about being stuck in the ambivalence or the neutrality of life. And that's really the kind of the point that I want to make, and maybe I should stop here before I go too far. It's in developing the Eightfold Path from a well-concentrated mind. You've heard me say this over and over again, but maybe it'll have a little bit more meaning, that we're able to be mindfully present with our life as our life occurs. Meaning that we will no longer be involved in our life in an ambivalent way. Every single thing will have meaning, but not in a way that we need it to be any different than it is. And because we don't need anything to be different than it is, our minds remain at peace and calm. We're able to be fully present with what's occurring. Lorna.
Can we take it one step further and say that is why we listen to music? And that is why we read books, and that is why we participate on a lot of actions.
Yes, so,
This is actually why we, can you say that? Can you take it that far?
well, you saw that I got myself in a little trouble on Tuesday night by saying that. But I didn't qualify it. Right? In the context, the answer is yes.
Yeah,
In the context.
I see that, yeah.
Anything can be taken to an extreme. Reading, music, anything. I'm not going to go down a long list. Anything can be taken, including listening to music. If I'm concerned, there's nothing at all in any way wrong with someone who listens to music while they're vacuuming. Nothing. But if you want to develop the Buddhist path, you might want to turn the music off while you're vacuuming. So you can be present with what you're doing. That's the point of the Buddhist Dhamma, is to be mindful with what's occurring. It doesn't make those other things. And this is where we're getting way away from a philosophical practice that has nothing to do with moral and ethics. And I'm making that point for the reason. The Buddha wasn't concerned just about morals. Of course he was, but not just about morals. Or he would say, just be good people and you'll be all right. Just follow these commandments and you'll be good to go. He was concerned about the quality of our thinking. And the quality of our thinking goes much beyond simple morals and ethics. It requires a willingness to stay mindful with life as life occurs, whether what we're doing in this moment is moral or not. It's beyond morals and ethics that way. Tom.
So I guess what I'm hung up on is the word feeling when you say neutral feeling. So I kind of understand what you're saying about, I actually do that when I don't enjoy cooking. So I always turn music on to kind of get me through it. So it's almost like the positive feeling of the music negates the negative feeling of cooking.
Yep.
So it's this neutral,
It is neutral. And so what you've done, that very powerful and common strategy, you've developed a way to not be present with a good portion of your life while you're cooking.
Right.
And you agreed to do it. I mean, I'm not putting you down. This is, we all do this.
No, exactly. I get it.
We say, I don't want to be here. I'm going to go do this and I don't have to be here. And we willingly do it. Well, and no matter what we do, sometimes we do it with substances, alcohol and drugs. Sometimes we do it with Facebook or Twitter. Sometimes we do it with an infinite number of things. And we also do it with so-called Buddhist practice.
Yeah, I think, it's that, like you said, distraction. Like 99% of my life is distraction.
Yes. And so the Buddha could have almost as accurately as described the first noble truth as saying there is distraction, as saying there is dukkha, because it's the ongoing preoccupation with dukkha that distracts us from living our life, that puts our lives into a plane of ambivalence that's very hard to get out of. Most of the time, the only way that we can feel that we're out of that ambivalence is to have something more extraordinary than our normal life. And so we create, this is often done on a very subconscious level, so we create scenarios to get our own attention in our own life.
Is that what you would call me drama?
So, yeah.
A drama queen? I might be in touch.
And so we're touching on something that could almost be overwhelming in its inference. Don't let it be, because it's not. It's simply part of life. It's simply part of the Dhamma. It's not a deeper or more disturbing level of life that we've been living. We've all been living our lives. But it is pointing out to the fact of the necessity, maybe that's why I'm teaching this right now, of incorporating the entire Eightfold Path as entirely and as well integrated as we can, because it's the only way we can get out of this. It's the only way we can recognize that neutrality, the ambivalence that we are to most of our life. And it's interesting that most of us, I'm relating what I'm about to say to the three refuges, most of us will relate ambivalent days as days of refuge, won't we? It was a good day. Nothing terrible happened today. But we've really done nothing to develop the Dhamma, have we? And again, it's not right or wrong. It's not moral or immoral. But we can lose the opportunity to awaken through attaching ourselves too much to ambivalence. Let me go just a little bit further to explain that. Most of us that have begun to develop a Dhamma practice and have stopped, which I bet is just about everyone in this room, except maybe Lorna, picked it up again when something awful happened in our life, or at least we thought about it. That's that kind of thinking. Instead of recognizing what Lorna pointed out earlier, we have been given the most valuable and important gift anyone can be given, the gift of understanding. And yet we treat it in a way that's almost like, I'll get to it. Even those of us that practice well, I'll get to it when I get to it. I'm really too busy today, or my day just wasn't pleasant enough. And one of the big hindrances I hear to practice is when people's lives are really difficult, at that point, they don't take to the Dhamma. They take a while to come back to it even then. Rather than understanding that the Dhamma is a true refuge from no matter what's occurring in the world, no matter what's occurring in our mind, no matter how ambivalent I might feel to my own life, I can take to the Dhamma and I can awaken. And so maybe I'll conclude this with this. To me now, the most recognizable, I recognize, I don't even know quite how to say this. Simple. Ambivalence is not something to chase after. It's not something we want. It seems pleasant. It seems like we've, at least for the moment, or maybe for the day or the week or the year, we've got things under control. The bills are paid for a while. There's enough food in. No hurricanes on the horizon. Everybody seems to like me, or at least the ones closest to me. My dog is smiling again. Everything's okay. And so we lose it in that point because we figured out a way to make ourselves feel comfortable in our ambivalence. So from now on, you'll have to remember this. It'll probably curse me out for every time you think of it. When you're feeling real good, take a look at what's there. When you're feeling ambivalent, when your life seems like almost unnoticeable, take a look at what's occurring. Take a breath and come into that moment. And you'll be surprised how meaningful what was ordinarily overlooked becomes. So that's today's talk. Okay. Any questions about what I just talked about? We'll learn more about it in the weeks to come. I'm going to do a couple of classes specifically on ambivalence and neutrality. But notice in the next few weeks, Excuse me.
I'm not sure about the meaning of how you're using the word ambivalence. I get stuck when you say that word. I get stuck and I can't process beyond that because I don't understand how you're using that.
Ambivalence,
I understand neutrality.
ambivalence would be simply not caring one way or another what's occurring. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just what it is. It's like a warm bowl of oatmeal, you know, unless you like hot oatmeal.
Okay, so maybe it'd be like indifference.
Indifference, yes. Is that a better word,
Okay.
indifference?
I think indifference.
Okay, so that aspect of our lives that we're constantly indifferent to. That was a better word?
Yeah.
Is the aspects of our lives that we successfully blocked out. We don't have to deal with it anymore because it's not there. We're involved in other things. We're thinking, we're involved in our day. We might be at work, we might be very successful, but we're not present with what's occurring because we're stuck in that indifferent state. And the whole point of being alive, forget about the Dhamma, the whole point of being alive is being alive, isn't it? And so how can we have meaningful lives, moment by moment, if we constantly employ strategies to distract us away from our own life in the moment? That's the nature of distraction. And it's the only way that a self-referential ego self, Anatta, can be maintained. It's simply too much effort to do it otherwise. So when we start bringing our mindfulness into what's occurring, the effort to continue to maintain Anatta simply slips away. We realize how fruitless it is, how foolish it is. Diane?
When the electricity went off last night, it got dark. I was laying in bed just trying to keep some aspect warm, and this thought came to me.
Oh, I thought you turned that heat on.
I did.
Oh, okay.
It reminded me. It's getting cold in here.
Sorry.
How much of my life I had spent worrying about what other people think of me. And a person's expression on their face can make ego think that they don't like me, or they're angry with me, or they're displeased, or something like that. And ego can just take that off, take that and run with it. I just kind of meditated on it or something, I realized how that caused me to not even be concerned about another person's feelings.
Yeah.
I was stuck in, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Why are they not happy with me? Yada, yada, yada. And I wasn't even thinking about what's causing their face to be distorted especially if it's a negative way. Are they in pain? Did something just happen? My compassion totally stops when I'm preoccupied with my feelings of, oh, what did I do wrong? Why didn't they give me a pleasant face? And it just felt like I could see, the ego's involvement in my, when I'm letting ego kind of run my life. I'm not present. I'm not in my body. I'm not in my breath. I'm not. When I'm letting something out there affect me, I'm not in my moment.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
the compassion part of that is what really got to me. I have been, I just, and this to me is important part of what I saw in the dark, is that, to me, it's the importance of meditation. If I don't go through this stuff, this dukkha that comes up in meditation, if I don't feel the feelings of it, it just stays stuck in the crevices of my mind and body. And it's not pleasant to go through the stuff that comes up in meditation. And I've even met someone who quit because of that. But it's that stuff that comes up in meditation that allows me the compassion that that develops and blossoms, the compassion in me for what's causing that distorted face, or the angry words or something like that. And it just opens my mind and my heart and my whole beingness to, oh my goodness, the other people are out there and they have feelings and they have stuff. And the understanding that comes from that is just humbling, I think. And then the part of the process that I see is just to be still and then know what to do. Know what the next right thing is to do.
Thank you. And the only way to do that is to be present with what's occurring.
Yeah.
That's really a common problem, to see other people as they see you, or think how you think other people see you, and take that on personally. But that's just an aspect of a self-referential ego. Everything Anatta does, it has to instill itself in, including what other people are saying to you. So other people could be telling you you're the most wonderful person in the world. You may think that you're not, and that person doesn't really believe what they're saying, and so you'll take that other person's words as negative rather than positive. It all has to do with the way we're thinking, the way we're looking at the world. That's why what I say, the most loving thing we can do is to take to the Dhamma and awaken. It really is the only thing we can do. But if we want a calm and peaceful mind, including our interactions with others, how other people might be acting towards us, the only thing we can do is awaken. Because then it won't matter. It won't matter in an important way, not in an arrogant way. I don't care what anybody thinks of me. It comes from a place of understanding that we cannot depend on what other people think of me. Is really what the rational way of looking at that is, unless that person's awake, unless we happen to know. Thank you, Diane. We'll go this way. Tom, good to see you this morning.
It's interesting, the vacuuming. And for you, because I use it exactly. I cook, put music on because I have told myself I don't like to cook. And really, it's like you said, it's just a distraction from what I'm doing in the moment. Really, I don't like my mind. I've convinced myself I don't like to cook because really, there's other things I would like to do. So it's like I'm clinging to these other things.
You're out of the present.
I'm out of the present.
Yep.
Right? So it's there's a lot of that. I've also so I understand the metaphor talking about Anatta. I was also thinking about someone's talking about being a victim. Not a victim of a crime, but how we play a victim throughout our lives, in our daily lives. And I had the realization, that really not much wrong. I have a pretty good life. I can't really complain about anything, but I find ways to say that I'm a victim. At work, or someone cuts me off, they would look what they did to me.
Yep, personalize it.
And all of these things that, as we're walking through life, and that victimization really is, you cling. Someone was talking on some webcast or something, talking about that, and said, everyone loves to be a victim. That's a great feeling. Oh, look what they did to me, or something like that. And you cling to it almost, so you find reasons that other people are taking from you. And I think certainly in the Northeast, it's even worse. Certainly when we're in cars, I feel like, the way we drive, I'm not letting that person go. They can't take from me. Little things like that throughout our life. It's amazing how that conditioned thinking really serves to keep that of self and
Yeah.
me. You know, really none of it. Most of the time, when you think of yourself as really understanding not self and going through life, distorted thinking kind of go, and that condition kind of goes away.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. That the Anatta, not self, can never be satisfied, and an awakened self is always satisfied. Doesn't need. I mean, that's the difference.
Mm.
You know, dukkha is let me put it this way: getting what you want all the time is unachievable, but yet Anatta will try to do it in every situation. But living a meaningful life is always achievable. It just means to let go, to let yourself be fully present without that self-referential ego self. And yet we'll go through all kinds of things to not do that. Do that simple, direct thing. So, thank you. Debbie, good to see you this morning.
Thanks. There's power in here. And I came to power. I brought everything, so I thought it was anyway, we're still puzzled, and I have to think more about the indifference piece, because that's one of the things that was coming up for me was the like politics, and I think I do create indifference so that I don't have to get weighed down by it so much. You know, I create what you're saying, that
Oh, yeah.
neutrality,
Yeah.
neutrality, so that I don't have to feel all the
Yeah.
unpleasant emotions related to politics. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, a strategy just against what's occurring. So you just don't have to be too aware of it.
So that's kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know what to, like, how do you handle it?
Oh, well, there's a few ways to handle it. One is, and I'm not saying this to be completely detached, just as a possibility. One is to just not pay attention to it. The world gets by just fine without my awareness or involvement. It just does.
That's
Now,
indifference?
well, that's one way to handle it. Another way is to get personally involved in politics. You know, run for office, etc., or be supportive of a party or a cause. That's another way to handle it. The way the Buddha always handled it is he got up every morning and meditated. He went out and got his bowl of food. He attended to his robes. He meditated again at night, and he went to sleep. Occasionally, a leader would come by and say, I got a problem with the next town. What can you do? And he would teach them the Dhamma. And they would engage in the next town as well as they could within the frameworks of the Dhamma. Sometimes it worked out well, sometimes it doesn't. It's not a good idea to live with our head in the sand. It's important that we know what's going on in the world we live in, but we don't have to be so engaged in it unless our job requires it. We don't have to be so engaged in it that it's a constant distraction or it affects us in such a hurtful way. You know, I'll say it again, the world's going to get by just fine whether I'm involved in it or aware of it. It doesn't need me in it one way or the other. And that's true for every single human being. But then you can take that a little bit further and say, with me in the world, in a awakened state or a nearly awakened state or a more awakened state, I can have some positive effect, can't I? I can have a real effect. Much more of an effect than simply being concerned about the politics in the world or the situation in the world. Actually developing the Dhamma will have a positive effect. It just will. Whether it's just on my own mind or not, it's likely to have more of a bigger effect than that. So if I really am concerned about the situation in the world, the most important thing I can do is meditate twice a day and develop a more profound integration of the Eightfold Path. Do you see how that, I know that makes sense to you, Debbie, but does it make a useful sense to you? A useful sense? Is it something that you would develop in your life? You understand that the world is in terrible shape. By the way, it always has been. But the most important thing I can do for myself and all other sentient beings is to awaken. I
feel on the fence, I guess, because I guess I don't believe that the world is.
this for me has a lot to do with animals, you know, and what's happening in
Mhm.
the world and how it affects man.
Yep.
And that really goes to my heart, tears at my heart. Like the whales with this, with the wolves with this, with that. And so, you know, I don't know. I just feel like so much sadness.
Mhm.
And of course, I've had a week of sadness, so that's essentially, but I don't know. Or
Yeah, it can be
I think
over.
I escape into neutrality.
Yeah. Well, so that what I said this morning might even hit you harder than it normally would,
Yeah.
because that's your refuge right now, is the neutrality of life, the indifference. That indifference is not a true escape. In other words, it's not really healthy. It seems like it, you know, like it's almost an escape from the troubles of the world, but it really isn't, because underneath you feel the tension, even though you're not constantly engaged in it. You're describing the underlying stress from the world, correct? So whether we're aware of the stress or not on a continual basis, it's still affecting us because of our indifference to it. There's an aspect of us that has to be aware of it. So we can't escape it. When the Buddha described the first noble truth, it has such pervasive ramifications. Simply stating dukkha occurs doesn't cover it, does it? But what it does say is that as a consequence of having a human life, there's going to be dukkha, there's going to be suffering. There's nowhere that the Buddha gave gradients to suffering. In other words, he didn't say, you know, folks, it's good you weren't here 4,000 years ago because it was much worse then than it is now. And he never said, you better watch out in 2,600 years when that Reagan gets in. I mean, what's his name? Trump gets in. You go. Dukkha occurs as a dukkha occurs as a consequence of having a life. It's not right. It's not wrong, and it's not even helpful to put blame for some of the suffering in the world. It is helpful to recognize where it comes from greed and aversion and desire. That's how all the problems in the world arise. You mentioned the whales and the other animals and all the other. I mean, there's I don't know how many species going out of that are going to become extinct in our lifetime. It's pretty shocking, you know. And it is something that we should be concerned about. But there's nothing that we should lose our minds over. So it's a good idea to be aware of that thing, of the what's going on in the environment, and to be mindful of our own contributions to that. In other words, to do the best we can to take care of the world we live in. And to encourage others to do the same. And if you're so inclined to go further than that, that's fine. But I'm talking about personal responsibility here. And then beyond that, we have to understand that the suffering that animals are feeling is all part of what the Buddha described as dukkha. Again, it's not right or wrong. It's important to see it that way. Species going out of existence is part of dukkha, and it's happened. We know that it's happened many times on our planet. So it's not right or wrong, and the fact that it's happened over and over and over and over again, and will continue, doesn't mean we should be indifferent to it, but it doesn't mean we should react to it either. And there's the big difference, because an ego says, "Wait a minute, I've been indifferent too long. A whale just died. We can't have that." Again, I'm being silly about that. We should be concerned about whales dying. We should be concerned about anything that loses its physical life. But we shouldn't lose our minds over it. We should understand the root cause of mankind's impact on the environment is greed. If we were well balanced, we wouldn't. But I'm only responsible for my own greed, right? The greed that's affecting all the animals is not my responsibility simply because I'm a human being. But I can understand it because I understand the nature of suffering. Those whales are suffering because they're having a life in this world. Not right or wrong. It's just the way it is. What can I do about it? Well, again, I can awaken I can stop contributing my own part to pollution, and in some small way, that's got to help. And if I'm so inclined and maybe a good speaker and I have all the facts, I can go out and speak about it, maybe motivate people. But I would hope I would do that having all the facts first. I don't know that. So, well, I mean, again, there's a lot of misinformation put out there too, and none of that's never helpful. You're right, Debbie. It's a difficult thing. I know I've talked about this in the past. When I was much younger, I lived with the news going on constantly. When I was home, the news was on the car, all that stuff, on the job. Even now that I think about it, and it really drove me crazy. And quite a while ago, I realized that I couldn't hope to develop a calm and peaceful mind if I had the news on 24/7. And it took a while, but I slowly cut back to the point where I wasn't watching news at all. I just didn't, maybe once in a while I would catch something just because it came over, I heard it. And that's why I say that, and the world went on fine without me watching the news 24/7. Presidents got elected and went out of office, and senators, et cetera. All of life went on without me knowing anything about it. And then I heard about this guy Trump who was running for president. I said, wait a minute, this is something. So I started watching it. It became fascinating like it did with everyone else. And then election night came. And I watched more TV that night than I've watched in years before because I couldn't believe what was occurring. And I'm not making I honestly don't have a judgment one way or the other. Because I see this current president, like I see most presidents, as an expression of Dukkha. This is a good one, but again, I'm honest. I'm serious about that.
He may get the award.
Maybe, but
Yeah, he's definitely.
so I started watching TV again because it became fascinating. It was a great distraction, and I found myself sitting in front of the TV for hours. Obviously, I don't know if I've done that again, but for a long period of time. And I noticed how deeply it was affecting the way that I was thinking when I wasn't in front of the tube. I was agitated. I was disturbed. I was concerned. I was watching things about people fighting in the streets again because of what happened. Destroying property. And it took a while, but I realized I can't do this either. But I felt for a few reasons. One is I just really want to know what's going on in the world today. This idea of this billionaire businessman of questionable character becoming the president of the United States is one of the most remarkable developments in my life. And it is fascinating. And I can't help but want to see where it's going. So I spend about an hour or two a week on watching the news. And that seems to be enough to get me just to the point of agitation, but also to understand what's occurring, and to see some things. But when I get that synopsis and the world is just like it was 2,600 years ago. The two big differences are, I think, the immediacy of our information. We hear things much quicker than we did, obviously, back then. So we hear about all the shootings and all the impromptu tweets and all the rest of it. We hear too much of it. And so to say that we should be connected to that 24/7 just because we can is ridiculous, for one thing. But it's hurtful. So, boy, I really went on, Debbie. Thank you for bringing this up. What I would suggest is to watch the news as much as you think is important or maybe acceptable or skillful, but then turn it off and realize how much you can actually do. To be.
Well, it's not just the news, it's like bombarding in your emails.
Oh, yeah.
Sign petitions. For me, it is because of the activism. It's like it's all constantly.
Well, that's the other thing, though.
Emails from.
Yeah, is to watch. This gets back to our associations, though, too.
Yeah.
One of the things that Buddha talked about consistently for 45 years is be mindful of your associations, because what you associate with, you're going to become. And if we associate ourselves with people that are constantly reacting through Facebook, et cetera, what are we going to become?